December 18, 1944. Stalag Luft III, Silesia, occupied Poland. The interrogation room was cold enough to see breath, but Hauptmann Friedrich Weber did not notice. He was too focused on the American pilot sitting across the metal table, Captain Robert Mitchell, shot down 3 days earlier over Cologne, now a prisoner of the Third Reich. Weber was 36 years old, career Luftwaffe officer, decorated veteran of the Spanish Civil War and the Battle of Britain, a man who had believed absolutely in German superiority until the certainty began cracking like ice under spring thaw. Mitchell was 24, farm boy from Iowa turned B-17 bomber pilot, exhausted, frightened, but holding himself together through stubborn Midwestern refusal to show weakness. Weber had conducted hundreds of these interrogations, breaking captured airmen through psychological pressure, exploiting fear and isolation, extracting tactical information the Geneva Convention prohibited, but which both sides pursued anyway. His technique was refined. Begin with contempt, mock the prisoner's country and cause, demonstrate the futility of resistance, then offer small kindnesses that made cooperation seem reasonable. He began as always. Your country is weak, mongrelized, led by a cripple and manipulated by Jews. You fight for nothing. We fight for civilization itself. Why do you continue this pointless resistance? He expected anger, defensiveness, the predictable responses he had seen countless times. Instead, Mitchell looked at him with something unexpected, not hatred but genuine curiosity, and asked a question that would haunt Weber for the rest of his life. If you truly believe that, why are you losing? Friedrich Weber had joined the Luftwaffe in 1933, drawn by the promise of restoring German pride after the humiliation of Versailles. He was university educated, son of a professor of classical literature, raised to appreciate European high culture, German philosophy, the traditions that supposedly made Germany the pinnacle of Western civilization. The Nazi ideology appealed to him not through its crudest racial hatreds, though he absorbed those too, but through its promise of order, hierarchy, excellence. Germany would lead Europe into a new age of greatness, sweeping away the decadence and chaos of democracy. He had been good pilot, excellent officer, rising quickly through ranks during the Luftwaffe's expansion. He flew in Spain, supporting Franco's forces, learning the brutal lessons of modern air warfare. He flew during the Battle of Britain in 1940, witnessing Germany's first major defeat but explaining it away as temporary setback, failure of strategy, not capability. He flew on the Eastern Front briefly before being reassigned to intelligence duties, interrogating captured Allied airmen, extracting information about tactics, technology, morale. The interrogation work suited him. He spoke fluent English, learned at university. He understood Allied culture well enough to exploit it. He was skilled at psychological manipulation, knowing when to threaten, when to sympathize, when to reason. He broke most prisoners eventually, not through torture, that was Gestapo work, not Luftwaffe, but through isolation, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of certainty that made cooperation seem like rational choice rather than betrayal. But by December 1944, something had changed in Weber. Not sudden conversion or moral awakening, nothing so dramatic, just accumulation of doubts that he could no longer ignore. The war was going badly. The Eastern Front had collapsed after Stalingrad. Italy had surrendered. The Normandy invasion had succeeded. Allied bombers flew over Germany daily, destroying cities with impunity. The promised wonder weapons, the V-1 and V-2 rockets, had not changed the strategic situation, and the prisoners he interrogated were not the degenerate weaklings propaganda had described. They were competent, educated, confident men who believed genuinely that they were fighting for something worth defending. Mitchell was typical of the American prisoners Weber had interrogated. Young, from ordinary background, no aristocratic pretensions or claims to cultural superiority, just straightforward belief that what he was doing was right. These Americans were supposed to be soft, undisciplined, incapable of sustaining sacrifice, yet they kept coming. Thousands of bombers, tens of thousands of crew, accepting horrific casualty rates to destroy German industry and break German resistance. How could a weak, mongrelized nation produce such sustained military effort? Mitchell's question hung in the air. If you truly believe that, why are you losing? Weber's first instinct was to respond with standard explanations. Germany was not losing, merely facing temporary setbacks, surrounded by jealous enemies, betrayed by saboteurs and weaklings. But he stopped himself, because Mitchell was right. Germany was losing. Not might lose, not facing difficulties, was losing objectively, measurably, in ways that ideology could not explain away. "We are not losing," Weber said, hearing the weakness in his own voice. "The war continues. The outcome is not determined." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, showing no fear, just exhaustion and a kind of weary honesty. "Captain Weber, I've been flying missions over Germany for 6 months. I've seen your cities burning. I've seen your fighters running out of fuel mid-engagement. I've seen your industrial centers collapsing. You know what I haven't seen? Any evidence that you're winning. So either your propaganda is lying to you, or you're lying to yourself." Weber should have ended the interrogation, should have sent Mitchell back to the prison compound, should have reported his insubordination. Instead, he asked a question he had not intended to ask. "Why do you fight? What does America gain from this war?" Mitchell considered carefully before answering. "We're not trying to gain anything. We're trying to stop you. You invaded most of Europe, murdered millions of civilians, started a war that's killed tens of millions. We're fighting because letting you win would be worse than the cost of fighting." This answer disturbed Weber more than defiance would have. Mitchell was not claiming America was fighting for territory or resources or glory, just that stopping Germany was necessary, which implied that Germany was so dangerous, so destructive, that even the massive cost of this war was justified to defeat it. "You believe we are evil," Weber said slowly. "You believe you are fighting a righteous war." Mitchell nodded. "Yes, don't you?" The question was devastating in its simplicity. Did Weber believe Germany was fighting a righteous war? He had believed that in 1939, had believed it in 1940. But now, in December 1944, with the war clearly lost, with concentration camps being whispered about, though he claimed not to know details, with German cities in ruins and millions dead, did he still believe Germany's cause was righteous? Could any cause justify this scale of destruction? "I believe Germany had legitimate grievances," Weber said carefully. "The Versailles Treaty was unjust. We were rebuilding our nation." Mitchell interrupted. "By invading Poland, by murdering Jews, by bombing London, that's not rebuilding. That's conquest and genocide." The word genocide hit Weber like a physical blow. It was not a term used in German propaganda, not something openly discussed. There were rumors, of course, about camps in the East, about mass killings, about policies designed to eliminate entire populations. But Weber had participated in the common denial. He did not work in those camps, did not implement those policies, was just a soldier following orders, fighting a war. What happened elsewhere was not his responsibility. But Mitchell's directness forced confrontation. "You know about the camps," Mitchell said. Not a question, a statement. "You're educated, intelligent, an officer in the Luftwaffe. You have access to information. You know what your country is doing to Jews, to Poles, to Russians, to anyone you classify as subhuman. So don't pretend this is just a war about territory or grievances. This is a war about whether your ideology of racial hierarchy and extermination is allowed to continue." Weber wanted to deny it, wanted to claim ignorance, wanted to change the subject. But he was tired of lying, tired of the mental gymnastics required to maintain belief in a cause that was falling apart. Tired of interrogating men who seemed more honest and certain than he felt. "What do you expect me to say?" he asked. "That I am a monster? That everything I believed was a lie? That my entire adult life has been in service of evil?" Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "I expect you to think. You asked me why America continues fighting. I'm asking you the same question. Why does Germany continue? You can't win. Every week you fight means more cities destroyed, more soldiers dead, more civilian suffering. Why not surrender? Why not end this?" Weber felt anger rising, not at Mitchell, but at the situation, at the trap he found himself in. Surrender means occupation, means judgment, means being held accountable for everything that was done in Germany's name. How can we surrender to that? How can you not? Mitchell responded. Every day you continue fighting, you're responsible for more deaths, more of your own people killed, more cities bombed, German soldiers dying for a cause that's already lost. Is avoiding accountability worth that? The question was paralyzing. Weber had spent 5 years following orders, believing in the cause, trusting that his superiors knew what they were doing. Now a captured American pilot was pointing out what Weber had been trying not to see, that continuing the war was not courage or loyalty, but cowardice and mass murder. The interrogation had reversed. Weber was supposed to be breaking Mitchell, extracting information, demonstrating German superiority. Instead, Mitchell was systematically dismantling Weber's worldview through simple questions that demanded honest answers. Weber felt his carefully constructed certainties crumbling, and he did not know how to stop it. He tried to regain control. "You are a prisoner. I am the interrogator. You will answer my questions, not ask your own." Mitchell shrugged. "Fine. What do you want to know? My unit? We're the 390th Bomb Group, 571st Squadron based in England. My crew? 6 of them are dead. 3, including me, are captured. My target? Cologne marshalling yards. Anything else?" He was volunteering information freely, rendering the interrogation pointless. Weber understood the message. Mitchell had nothing to hide because America had nothing to hide. Their strategy was public knowledge: destroy German industry, break German resistance, force unconditional surrender. No secret weapons, no hidden plans, just overwhelming material superiority and willingness to sustain the effort until Germany collapsed. "How can you be so confident?" Weber asked, genuinely curious now. "How can your country sustain this? The casualties, the expense, the years of war?" Mitchell thought before answering. "Because we believe it's necessary. Because we have political system that allows dissent but generates consensus. Because we have economy that can produce what we need. Because we're fighting for something we think is worth fighting for. Not conquest. Not racial supremacy. Just stopping you from conquering everyone else." Weber seized on this. "You claim moral superiority, but your country enslaved Africans, exterminated natives, segregates races. How are you different from us?" It was deflection, whataboutism, attempt to equalize the moral calculus. Mitchell did not flinch. "You're right. America has done terrible things. We have racial problems we haven't solved. We have history of violence and injustice, but we're at least trying to improve. We debate these issues, we have movements for change. We have mechanisms for holding power accountable. What mechanisms does Germany have? What happens when someone in Germany criticizes the Führer or questions racial policies? They disappear. That's the difference. We're imperfect democracy. You're totalitarian state committing genocide. Those are not equivalent." Weber had no response. Every argument he raised, Mitchell countered not with propaganda but with uncomfortable truths. The Americans were not claiming perfection, just that their system was better than Germany's, that imperfect democracy was superior to efficient tyranny, and the evidence supported them. America was winning. Germany was losing. Ideology could not explain away material reality. The interrogation ended inconclusively. Weber sent Mitchell back to the prison compound without extracting any useful intelligence, without breaking his spirit, without demonstrating German superiority. Instead, Weber felt broken himself, not emotionally shattered but intellectually defeated. His certainties had been revealed as hollow, his arguments as rationalizations, his cause as morally bankrupt. He wrote his report, noting that the prisoner had provided basic information but refused cooperation on tactical matters. He did not mention the conversation's substance, did not report Mitchell's challenges to German ideology. He filed the report and tried to forget the interrogation, but Mitchell's questions haunted him. "Why are you losing? Why not surrender? How can you not?" Weber began paying closer attention to information he had previously dismissed or ignored. Reports from the Eastern Front describing desperate defensive battles, entire armies destroyed, Soviet forces advancing inexorably toward Germany, intelligence about Allied industrial production, numbers so large they seemed impossible, yet verified by multiple sources. Casualty figures from German cities bombed by American and British air forces. The evidence was overwhelming. Germany could not win, could not even fight to stalemate. The only question was how long the losing would continue and how many more would die before the inevitable end. He also began noticing things he had trained himself not to see: the disappearance of Jewish prisoners from the camp, their transfer to other facilities that no one discussed openly, the rumors among guards about camps in Poland where people were not just imprisoned, but murdered systematically, industrially, in numbers that defied comprehension, the casual brutality toward Soviet prisoners, the starvation and disease, the assumption that Slavic lives had no value, The ideology he had absorbed and defended was not just wrong, it was actively evil, producing suffering on scale he had not allowed himself to acknowledge. On Christmas Eve 1944, Weber volunteered to distribute Red Cross parcels to American prisoners. It was not his duty. Junior officers handled such tasks. But he wanted to see Mitchell again, wanted to continue the conversation that had shaken him so profoundly. He found Mitchell in the barracks recovering from mild frostbite, looking thinner than during the interrogation but still maintaining the quiet dignity that characterized him. "Captain Mitchell," Weber said in English, "I wanted to ask you something. When the war ends, when Germany surrenders, what happens to people like me, officers who served the Reich but did not commit atrocities directly? What happens to us?" Mitchell looked at Weber with mixture of surprise and wariness. Prisoners did not normally receive friendly visits from their interrogators. "I don't know," Mitchell said honestly. "That's not my decision. There will be trials, I assume. People who committed crimes will be punished. People who just fought as soldiers, probably they'll go home, try to rebuild. But Captain Weber, why are you asking me this?" Weber sat on the edge of a bunk, breach of protocol, fraternizing with prisoners, and spoke quietly so others would not hear. "Because your questions during the interrogation forced me to think about things I have been avoiding, about whether the cause I serve is just, about what I will have to answer for when this ends, about whether following orders is sufficient defense for serving evil government." He paused. "I think I know the answers, but I wanted to hear them from you." Mitchell studied him carefully. "You're having a crisis of conscience. You're realizing that Germany is going to lose and wondering what that means for you personally." It was harsh assessment, but Weber nodded. "Yes, but also more than that. I am realizing that we were wrong, not just strategically but morally, that the ideology I accepted, the propaganda I believed, the cause I fought for, all of it was built on lies and hatred, and I participated. I did not kill civilians directly, did not run concentration camps, did not implement the policies, but I served the system that did. I interrogated prisoners like you to help Germany continue the war, which means I helped continue the murders, the destruction, the atrocities. How do I live with that?" Mitchell was silent for a long moment. Then, "I don't know if you can. I don't know if anyone can carry that weight and remain sane, but I know that recognizing it is the first step. Most people in your position will deny responsibility until they die. They'll claim they didn't know, didn't participate, were just following orders. You're at least being honest with yourself, that's something." Weber felt tears forming. He had not cried since childhood, had been trained to suppress emotion, to maintain control. But now, facing the collapse of everything he had believed, he could not maintain the facade. "What should I do?" he asked. "I cannot change the past, cannot undo what I have done, but I have perhaps 6 months before this war ends. What should I do with that time?" Mitchell considered carefully before answering. "Stop helping them. Do whatever you can to end this faster, even if it's just small things. Treating prisoners humanely, maybe passing intelligence to us, finding ways to undermine the war effort without getting yourself killed. Make your remaining time count for something good." Over the following months, Weber implemented Mitchell's advice in small ways. He ensured prisoners received their full Red Cross parcels. Other guards skimmed supplies, but Weber made sure everything reached the prisoners. He accidentally left intelligence documents where prisoners working as orderlies could read them. Information about German troop movements, weaknesses in defenses, which officers were fanatical Nazis, and which were secretly hoping for German defeat. He reported falsified interrogation results, claiming prisoners were uncooperative when actually they had provided useful information, protecting them from enhanced interrogation by Gestapo. These were minor acts of sabotage, almost invisible, but they accumulated. Small amounts of intelligence reached Allied commanders through prisoner debriefings after liberation. Small kindnesses helped prisoners survive when conditions deteriorated as Germany collapsed. Weber could not change the war's outcome. That was already determined. But he could affect how individual prisoners experienced their captivity. He also began documenting what he knew about war crimes. Not overtly, that would have gotten him executed, but keeping careful records of conversations overheard, orders given, transfers of prisoners to camps where they disappeared. He wrote these notes in code, hiding them in his personal effects, hoping that someday they might serve as evidence. He did not know if this made him less guilty. He was still serving in Wehrmacht, still wearing the uniform, still enabling the system through his presence. but it felt like doing something rather than nothing, like refusing complete complicity. In March 1945, as Soviet forces approached from the east, the camp authorities began preparing to evacuate prisoners westward, death marches that would kill thousands through exposure, starvation, and summary executions. Weber was assigned to lead one of these columns. He was ordered to shoot any prisoner who could not keep pace. Standard procedure, enforced brutally by SS guards who accompanied the march. Weber made a decision. During the first night of the march, when the column stopped in a forest, he gathered the American prisoners and spoke in English. "The SS guards are planning to kill most of you before we reach the new camp. Too many prisoners, not enough food, and they don't want to leave witnesses to what happened here. I am going to help you escape. When we march tomorrow, I will lead you near American lines. When I give signal, you run. I will shoot into the air, claim you overpowered me. Some of you will be shot by SS guards, but most should make it. Understand?" The prisoners were suspicious. Why would their captor help them escape? But they had no better option. Mitchell spoke for the group. "Why are you doing this?" Weber answered honestly. "Because you asked me why we continue fighting when we have already lost. Because you made me understand that following orders is not sufficient moral defense. Because I spent 5 years serving evil, and I have one chance to do something good before it ends. I cannot save everyone, but I can save you." He paused. "And also because I hope that when this is over, when I am judged for my service to the Reich, someone will remember that I tried to stop being part of it at the end." That sounds selfish. It is selfish, but it is also true. The escape was chaotic and partially successful. Weber led the column to within 2 kilometers of American lines, then gave the signal. Approximately 40 prisoners ran toward the Allied positions. SS guards opened fire, killing 7. Weber shot into the air, shouting that the prisoners had ambushed him. In the confusion, he was shot in the shoulder by an SS guard who suspected his story. The remaining prisoners were recaptured and forced to continue the march. But 33 Americans reached the Allied lines. They reported the conditions in the camp, the planned executions, and Weber's assistance. American forces advanced rapidly, liberating the remaining prisoners before they could be killed. Mitchell was among those who escaped. Weber was among those captured, not by the Americans who might have treated him with some leniency, but by the SS guards who recognized his betrayal. He was court-martialed by German military authorities for dereliction of duty and suspected treason. The trial was brief. Testimony from SS guards, Weber's weak denials, evidence of his recent behavior that the camp commandant had been documenting. He was sentenced to execution, to be carried out immediately. He was given 30 minutes to write final letters to his family. In those 30 minutes, Weber wrote not to his family but to Mitchell. A letter he gave to a sympathetic guard with instructions to deliver it to American authorities after the war. The letter explained his actions, acknowledged his guilt for 5 years of service to Nazi Germany, described the intelligence he had documented about war crimes, and asked for one thing: that someone remember he had tried to change, that someone acknowledge that even those who served evil could recognize it and attempt redemption, however inadequate that attempt might be. He was executed on April 10, 1945, 3 weeks before Germany's final surrender. The guard who promised to deliver his letter was killed 2 days later in the war's chaotic final battles. The letter was lost. Robert Mitchell returned to the United States in May 1945, debriefed by military intelligence, medically evaluated, granted leave before his discharge. He testified at several war crimes trials, describing conditions in Stalag Luft III, identifying guards who had committed abuses, providing intelligence he had gathered during captivity. He mentioned Weber during these depositions, the German officer who had interrogated him, who had later helped prisoners escape, who had been executed for his actions. Military investigators tried to verify Mitchell's account, searching for records of Weber's court-martial and execution. But the documentation was incomplete. German military records from the war's final weeks were chaotic or destroyed. Many officers' fates were unknown. Confirmation was often impossible. Weber's name appeared in some records as Luftwaffe intelligence officer assigned to Stalag Luft III, but there was no official record of his trial or execution. He had disappeared into the chaos of Germany's collapse, one of millions whose final moments were unrecorded. Mitchell thought about Weber often in the decades after the war. He thought about the interrogation that had become philosophical debate, about the questions that had forced a Nazi officer to confront his complicity, about the man who had helped prisoners escape knowing it would cost his life. Mitchell understood that Weber was not hero. He had served the Reich for 5 years, had participated in the war effort, bore responsibility for Germany's crimes through his service. But Mitchell also understood that Weber had changed, had recognized his error, had tried to make amends even when it was too late. In 1968, Mitchell was teaching history at University of Iowa, specializing in World War II. He included unit on moral responsibility during wartime, asking students to grapple with difficult questions. Can soldiers claim they were just following orders? Does serving an evil government make you responsible for its crimes? Can recognition of error and attempted redemption reduce moral guilt? He always told them about Weber, the Nazi officer who questioned his own cause, who helped prisoners escape, who was executed by his own military for refusing to continue participating in atrocities. Some students argued that Weber's late war change of heart did not excuse his earlier service, that redemption required more than one act of conscience. Others argued that recognizing error and taking personal risk to correct it demonstrated moral courage that deserved acknowledgement. Mitchell refused to tell students what to think, only to think carefully about moral complexity, about how ordinary people become complicit in evil, about whether change is possible and what it requires. In 1985, 40 years after the war, Mitchell received an unexpected letter from Germany. It was from Weber's daughter, now in her 60s, who had spent decades searching for information about her father's fate. She had found references to Mitchell in declassified American military documents, describing Weber's assistance to prisoners and his subsequent execution. She wrote asking if Mitchell could provide any additional information about her father's final months, about whether he had suffered, about whether he had said anything that might bring her family closure. Mitchell wrote back immediately, describing his interactions with Weber in detail, the interrogation that had become conversation, the Christmas Eve visit, the escape plan, Weber's stated motivations. He tried to be honest about complexities, Weber's service to the Nazi regime, his complicity in Germany's crimes, but also his willingness to question, his attempt to help, his ultimate sacrifice. He concluded, "Your father was not a hero. He served an evil government for years before recognizing what he was part of, but when he did recognize it, he acted courageously to stop participating. That does not erase his earlier guilt, but it means something. It means that even those who have been complicit in evil can change, can refuse to continue, can try to do better even when it's too late to undo the harm they've caused." Weber's daughter replied with gratitude and additional information. She had found witnesses who confirmed Weber's execution, former guards at the camp who had survived the war, who remembered the court-martial, who described Weber's final hours. She had also found the intelligence documentation Weber had compiled, the coded notes about war crimes he had witnessed, hidden among his personal effects and preserved by his family. She had given these documents to historians researching Holocaust and war crimes, adding to the historical record of Nazi atrocities. Mitchell asked permission to share Weber's story more widely. He wanted to write an article for academic journal, describing the interrogation and its aftermath, using Weber as case study for questions about moral responsibility and redemption. Weber's daughter agreed with condition that the article acknowledge her father's guilt as well as his attempts at redemption, that it not whitewash his service or present him as simply victim of the system. Mitchell published the article in 1987, The Nazi Officer Who Questioned Moral Transformation in the Final Months of World War II. It generated significant academic discussion, debates about whether Weber's actions constituted genuine moral change or merely self-interested attempt to avoid punishment, about what obligations soldiers have to refuse service in unjust wars, about whether redemption is possible for those who have been complicit in mass atrocities. Mitchell continued corresponding with Weber's daughter for the rest of his life, developing unlikely friendship based on shared interest in understanding the war's moral complexities. She visited Iowa in 1990, meeting Mitchell and his family, seeing where he lived and taught, discussing how their father's brief interaction had shaped both their lives. She told him that growing up in post-war Germany with a father who had been executed for treason, even treason against the Nazi regime, had been complicated. Some saw Weber as martyr, who had recognized the regime's evil and paid for that recognition. Others saw him as traitor who had betrayed his comrades when Germany most needed loyalty. "I have spent my entire life trying to understand who my father was," she told Mitchell. Whether he was good man who made terrible mistake by serving the Nazis, or bad man who had one moment of conscience at the end. I think the truth is he was ordinary man who made both good and terrible choices, who was shaped by his time and place, but also had capacity to question and change. Your conversation with him, your questions about why Germany was losing, why he continued fighting, those questions saved him, not physically, but morally. They gave him chance to see clearly and act on what he saw. Mitchell died in 1999 at age 79. His obituary mentioned his military service, his academic career, his family. It did not mention Weber. That story was too complicated, too ambiguous for brief summary of a life. But at his funeral, his children read from his letters and articles, including passages about the Nazi officer who had questioned, who had helped prisoners escape, who had demonstrated that moral change was possible even in extremis. Weber's daughter attended the funeral. She brought with her the original coded documentation her father had compiled about war crimes, now preserved in Holocaust Museum, part of historical record ensuring that atrocities would be remembered and understood. She spoke briefly, thanking Mitchell for treating her father as complete human being rather than simple villain, for acknowledging that people could change even when change came too late, for preserving story that demonstrated both the ease of complicity and the difficulty of resistance. After the funeral, several of Mitchell's former students approached Weber's daughter. They had heard the story in Mitchell's classes, had grappled with the ethical questions it raised, had been challenged to think about how they would act in similar circumstances. One student, now herself a professor of ethics, said, "Your father's story haunted me through my education and career, because he represents something we don't want to face, that ordinary, educated, intelligent people can serve evil, and that recognizing you've been wrong requires enormous courage." I teach his story to remind students that moral clarity is rare, that most of us exist in gray zones, that the test is whether we're willing to question and change when confronted with truth. The true climax of this story is not a single dramatic moment, but a recognition that emerged gradually, that the interrogation room encounter between Mitchell and Weber represented something fundamental about how people change, how certainty collapses, how moral transformation happens not through revelation, but through questions that cannot be ignored. Mitchell had not intended to challenge Weber's worldview. He was exhausted prisoner, frightened, trying to survive captivity. But when Weber began the interrogation with standard Nazi propaganda about American weakness and German superiority, Mitchell responded instinctively with simple truth. If you truly believe that, why are you losing? That question, asked without calculation or strategic intent, forced Weber to confront reality he had been denying. It was not sophisticated philosophical argument. It was empirical observation. Germany was losing, objectively, measurably. If German ideology was correct, if racial superiority determined military outcome, why was the superior nation being defeated by inferior ones? That single question unraveled years of indoctrination because it demanded concrete answer in material reality rather than abstract ideological justification. Weber could not explain German defeats through Nazi ideology. The ideology predicted German victory. So either the ideology was wrong, or reality was wrong. And reality does not adjust to accommodate ideology. What followed, Weber's crisis of conscience, his assistance to prisoners, his execution, flowed from that moment of cognitive dissonance. Mitchell had created opening, forced Weber to see contradiction between belief and evidence. Once that opening existed, Weber's intellectual honesty, the education and critical thinking his university training had developed, pulled him through it toward recognition that he had been serving evil. The climax was not redemption. Weber did not achieve redemption. His late-war change of heart did not erase 5 years of service to Nazi regime, did not undo the suffering he had enabled through his participation. The climax was recognition, understanding that he bore responsibility, that following orders was insufficient moral defense, that he had choices even within the constrained circumstances of military service, and that recognition led to action, not heroic action, helping a few dozen prisoners escape while millions died in camps and battlefields, but action that demonstrated humans retain moral agency even in extremis, that change is possible even for those who have been deeply complicit in evil, that questions, simple, honest questions about observable reality, can be more powerful than elaborate ideological constructions. Mitchell's question did not save Weber's life, but it gave Weber opportunity to save his conscience, to demonstrate that even those who have served evil can recognize it and refuse to continue. That was the climax, the moment when a question destroyed certainty and created space for conscience to operate. The story of Robert Mitchell and Friedrich Weber is documented in academic articles, in historical archives, in testimonies preserved by museums and research institutions. But it remains relatively unknown outside specialized scholarship on World War II, ethics and moral responsibility. It is not the kind of story that fits comfortable narratives about the war. It does not provide clear heroes and villains, does not offer simple moral lessons, does not allow us to separate good people from bad people cleanly. Weber's story is uncomfortable because it demonstrates that educated, intelligent, morally capable people can serve evil for years before recognizing what they're doing. It challenges the assumption that only monsters commit atrocities, that ordinary people could never be complicit in genocide and warfare. Weber was ordinary, university educated, culturally sophisticated, from respectable family. Nothing about his background predicted he would serve Nazi regime. Nothing about his intelligence or education prevented him from absorbing Nazi ideology. He was proof that evil is enabled by ordinary people who convince themselves that their service is justified, that their government's propaganda is true, that questioning is disloyalty. But Weber's story is also uncomfortable because it demonstrates that change is possible, that recognition can occur, that even those who have been deeply complicit can refuse to continue participating. This challenges our desire for absolute judgments, for permanent categories of guilty and innocent. If someone who served the Nazis for 5 years can have genuine change of conscience, what does that mean for how we judge moral responsibility? Does late recognition reduce guilt? Does attempted redemption matter even when it cannot undo harm? The questions Mitchell asked Weber in that interrogation room, why are you losing? Why not surrender? How can you not? Remain relevant. They are questions we should ask about any ideology, any government, any cause that demands our service. If the evidence contradicts the propaganda, if the outcomes do not match the promises, if the methods require suppressing doubt and punishing questions, those are indicators that the cause may not be just, that service may be complicity in evil. Mitchell's final reflection, written shortly before his death. I did not intend to change Weber's mind. I was just answering his propaganda with obvious truth. But I learned something from what happened, that simple questions about observable reality can be more powerful than elaborate arguments, that people can change if given opportunity to see clearly, and that moral courage sometimes means asking questions when certainty would be easier. Weber was no hero. He served evil for years, but he demonstrated that humans retain capacity for conscience even after long complicity. That's important to remember, because most of us in his circumstances would have done what he did, served the system, believed the propaganda, avoided difficult questions until someone forced us to confront them. War changes men, nations, and truths. A Nazi officer tried to break an American prisoner with propaganda. Instead, the prisoner's simple questions broke the officer's certainty and forced him to confront what he had been serving. If this story made you reflect on how ordinary people become complicit in evil, how questions can challenge ideology, how moral change is possible even in extremists, share it. Because the most important questions are often the simplest. If your ideology predicts one outcome but reality shows another, which do you believe? If serving your cause requires suppressing doubt and evidence, is the cause just? If you recognize you've been wrong, do you have the courage to change even when change is costly? These questions matter. They always matter. And sometimes asking them or being forced to answer them is the difference between continuing to serve evil and finding the courage to stop.